Hi, I'm Jenna.
And I'm Erin.
And welcome to Between Two Filing Cabinets, where we bring you tips, trends, troubles, and stories from HR.
That's right. And today we're going to be talking a little bit more about trends and the trend that we're seeing around privacy. But first, let me ask you, Jenna, have you ever accidentally pocket dialed somebody?
You know, I have not pocket dialed someone, but I've received pocket dials. I've had a few from my husband and hear him walking down a hall, or from my mom, or, which are usually like 6 minutes long because she doesn't know that she's done it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I confess I've been the recipient of them, but not really. I don't think I've ever perpetuated a pocket dial. I will confess, though, when it's a voicemail, I will kind of listen through to see if there's anything interesting. And there never is. It usually is somebody walking down the hallway, or basically just, some muffled FM music. But the case that you told me about this morning, very different type of pocket dial. So tell us a little bit about what happened.
Yeah, so this was an interesting case where an employee at some company had his phone in his pocket and thought he was just having a conversation with his wife about work. And he happened to be talking about his boss and saying some not so nice things that, if you were probably to hear as a boss, would be pretty upsetting. Well, what he didn't know was that he had accidentally pocket dialed his boss, who overheard the whole conversation. So the next morning when the employee came in, he was given a decision, and that decision was, you either resign or I'm going to fire you.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so it was kind of an interesting one, and so the employee ended up filing a lawsuit against his boss. And so this was an interesting case because a lot of times we think about the liability in terms of the company, right? Well, this was in the scope of employment, so is there an employment claim? And in this scenario, there really wasn't an employment claim necessarily, because you look at potential claims that there might be wrongful termination. It wasn't for any unlawful reason that he was being fired. And then the big one that we think about is the National Labor Relations Act that would protect employees from engaging in group activity regarding terms and conditions of employment. And so the nature of the conversation wasn't really involving any terms or conditions of employment. It was just like griping about his boss. So there wasn't group activity, and it wasn't a term or condition of employment. So that claim's out the window.
It might have been, you mentioned though, it might have been great. Let's say a wife had been a fellow worker there.
True.
Okay.
Right. So if it was, his wife was also an employee there, and he was, complaining something of like, my boss is a moron and pays us all horrible wages, and we need to do something about our wages. Well, then there might be an employment claim for violation of the National Labor Relations Act, because you'd have group activity, right? At least two people, and then you have term or condition of employment.
Right.
But just generalized griping is just kind of part of being a boss, I guess.
Right. And especially since it's just spouse. Spouse was not a coworker.
Right.
Clearly not protected.
Right. But the interesting thing about this one was that he actually sued for invasion of privacy. It wasn't an employment claim. Yeah, so kind of different there. And ultimately he failed on that claim because the court said, hey, you know what, you don't have any expectation or reasonable expectation of privacy when you have your phone around you. And the Sixth Circuit actually referenced a case that, had said, where the plaintiff had admitted that they had made previous pocket dials or had been a recipient, so that they knew there was the risk. And so they said, hey, you know what? There's a risk, so your expectation of privacy is lost now.
Seems harsh. I don't know. I mean, I'm not really sure how I feel about that ruling. It does beg the question whether or not the reasonable expectation of privacy, if we're going to see a trend where that is gone.
That is a trend that I think we should look at, is like, is it really gone? We were talking before and saying, like, I've been doing a training and I'll say some word that sounds something like Siri, and like seriously, and then my phone will go boop, boop, and start listening to me. And your phone, when you're in that mode, it can also make a call. And so I was like, my first reaction was like, of course the person would have expectation of privacy. If I've got my phone on lock, I wouldn't expect it to be dialing people, but doesn't seem to be the trend.
Right, no, it doesn't.
That's happening. So I think that's something that, we're going to have to take a look at, and especially with everything that's going on with Facebook and all of those, and those hearings that Mark Zuckerberg was doing last week.
Right.
I think it's something that we're going to hear a lot more about, and it'll be interesting to see if we see more claims in that zone that are related to employment issues. I mean, because I think up until this point, I don't know, I've heard of the pocket dial a whole lot before. It's mostly if we see a post on Facebook or something like that where someone has said something about their boss and their boss was like, "You're fired." But not really this one, where I think you have a much stronger expectation of privacy.
I would think so too. And now as everything is becoming, you have smart homes and everything is automated, I think that the risk is greater. And if you already have this kind of, this standard in place or this precedent in place as far as your phone is concerned, I mean, how will that affect technology in general?
And it makes me think of like some of the other areas where supervisors have personal liability. A lot of times when we do harassment training, we talk about it in the employment context and trying to manage employment liability. And a lot of times your insurance is going to cover you as a supervisor for, any acts that you may take. But what a lot of people don't realize is you can be personally sued, either a criminal complaint or a civil lawsuit for your actions or potentially your failure to act. And so it's not just, your employer might not always have your back. That person can sue you individually, independent of the employment claim. And we see this a lot with the harassment cases right now that have been coming up through Hollywood. They're not employment claims. No. They're criminal or civil complaints. And so I think that's, again, sort of a trend. It's not necessarily a trend. I'm not sure whether it's a trend, but it's something I think that supervisors really have to pay attention to. I guess that's something that we have to watch to see is like, are there going to be more of those?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think in our basics of supervision training, a lot of times it's a surprise to new supervisors that they can be personally liable. And now we're saying not just liable for your actions within an organization, right? But you can be sued in your individual capacity.
Yeah.
Organization not sued at all.
Right.
You're on the hook,
yeah.
potentially.
So Erin, what tips would you have, I guess, kind of looking at all of these things for a supervisor in these types of situations?
Well, I mean, it is unfortunate, and I'm sure that if I heard some wickedly horrible things said about me via someone's, inadvertent pocket dial, I'm sure my first reaction wouldn't be awesome. At the same time, you got to think about this too. It's like, well, your first reaction probably isn't your best reaction, and I would have hoped that if that had happened to me, I would have maybe seen this as an opportunity for a little self-reflection and say, like, okay, well, this is someone who's really unhappy with me. How did I let this get this bad? And so maybe this would be a good opportunity to talk with that person and clear the air about what is going wrong in that relationship. Just turning around and firing them? I don't know. I mean, I'm not privy. Maybe we should go dig up the case to see exactly what was said. Maybe it was just so out of line. On the other hand, though, I mean, it's hard to imagine content that would justify turning around and without further conversation saying either you're going to resign or I'm going to fire you.
Right, yeah, it had to be pretty inflammatory, I would think, but I mean, that's us. I mean, we would think that, hey, it's got to be pretty inflammatory, but unfortunately, we've both had conversations where people have taken, swift action when they should have just taken some time.
Yeah.
And they may have terminated that person anyways, right? But just that quick action can get you into trouble.
Don't react, right?
Yeah.
I mean, in general, a reaction is not going to be well received. It's not going to go down very well. Kind of thinking it out, taking some time, maybe getting someone else's opinion before taking action like that. And then, that does bear, for some introspection, like, potential tip. Hey, if you're a supervisor, don't be a jerk. Pay attention to those relationships.
Yeah.
So that you wouldn't be on the receiving end of something like that. So I don't want to blame the victim, so to speak, but at the same, we really don't know the full set of facts. But that type of reaction does give me a kind of pause. That doesn't seem like a very wise choice.
Yeah. So don't react. Slow down. Get some advice before you do anything, and just be aware, I think, in general of that the privacy issue, and that, it's really trending towards we don't have a lot of privacy. And so when you think about your communications with employees, emails, texts, Facebook posts, I think when you're in a supervisor position, you have to be really careful of what you're putting out there, and also very careful with what you do, with what you see.
Exactly. So even if we did say go the way of there's no more reasonable expectation of privacy, you still have a relationship with the people that you work with, and you want to have them most of the time stick around. And so being mindful that regardless of what the legal standard is, people feel like they have, like an expectation of privacy, and be cognizant of that.
Yeah, good. All right. Well, we're going to file this one under privacy.
Sounds good.
And we will see you next time.
Thanks.
Thanks.